Our first speaker this afternoon is Dr. Guido Hülsmann. Guido's lecture is on the division of labor and social order. Guido?
Thank you very much for the warm welcome. I'm happy that you don't resent my PowerPoint disaster from yesterday evening. So just as to prevent a similar case today, I return back to good old paper, no more PowerPoint. So our lecture will be on the division of labor and social order. That is the title, but in fact it is the theory of the division of labor is a part of the theory of production. And the point of my lecture is to cover the real aspects of the production processes. What does it make that production can be more or less productive? What are the different basic real strategies, that is non-monetary, real always as compared to monetary spending? What are the basic real mechanisms through which we can increase the productivity of human labor, so the main source of our wealth. And in subsequent lectures, we will then cover, that is not myself, but my colleagues will cover the monetary aspects. As first, we need to introduce then money, and then examine how money prices steer precisely those processes that we are now discussing in general. It is even that hold true, we are discussing those aspects that hold true universally, even outside of a monetary economy. So we'll proceed in 6 steps. First, I will discuss with you the nature of production, give a definition of production. Then we will discuss the limits of production in a second step. And the limits of production can be summarized under the heading of the law of returns. In a third step, we will raise the question how we can increase human productivity. And there are 2 main ways to do this. We will discuss these 2 main ways in steps 4 and 5. And finally, in the 6th step, we will stress the fundamental role of savings. Okay, so what is production? Production is the intentional transformation of nature by human beings. It's a transformation of nature. So if I change, it's always a transformation of nature. Any production process does not create something. We are not gods. We are human beings. So we take what we find and we transform this into something else. It's always a transformation process. Now, part of the transformation processes are not intentional. For example, we are breathing, and it is not our intention to create the gases that result from our breathing process, at least not in most cases. So this would not be a case of production. But it is a case of production if we set out a road. A road virtually never comes into being by accident. Okay, it's always something that is a planned transformation, of an intentional transformation of nature. And so in any case, it is a necessary element of production that it involves human activity, at least some human choice. And we, not necessarily extended activity. For example, if we store wine in a cave in order to improve its quality, so it will last there for 2 or 3 years, it doesn't involve constant activity on our part. We just put it into the cave and let it mature down there at fairly constant temperature with no light and so on. This is still a production process because it involves our choice. We made an initial choice to store the wine there. We could have taken it out, or we can take it out at any point of time, so it's always subject to our choice. So production is the principal way through which human beings obtain revenue, through which they obtain the goods that they desire. The other way, the only logically other way, is to take those things that we find spontaneously in nature. And even in those cases, strictly speaking, there is some production involved. If I go on the prairie somewhere and I find an apple tree that has not been planted by a human being, so it doesn't belong to anybody, it's a home homeless or an ownerless apple tree, and I take an apple, strictly speaking, this is a production process, because I transform my environment, I transform nature, go to the apple tree, pluck the apple. Without my activity, the apple would still hang on the tree, or would fall to the ground. Now it's in my hand. It's a very primitive production process. But so we see that in this case, we are benefiting, we are deriving our economic goods, the goods that we desire, from the environment as it exists without human intervention, so environment in its original state. But if we, so this is of course the lifestyle of hunters and gatherers, so primitive human lifestyles, they were living off the environment. We're not transforming it intentionally. This is of course what we do today, and this is the most productive way of creating additional goods. We transform our environment intentionally in order to create much more economic goods than nature would give us all by herself. So then the question is, what limits our productive abilities here? What limits our productivity? What limits the productivity of human labor? This is the central question in the theory of production. Because there are, of course, various other factors of production that we use, right? There are land resources, raw materials, and the air that we breathe, so there's oxygen that is there spontaneously and so on. But most of the things we produce, we have to produce ourselves. So what limits our productivity? We summarize this under the heading of the law of returns. What the law of returns says is that because of the limitation involved in any factor of production, in particular also in human labor, the output that I can create within any period, an hour, a day, a year, etc., is limited. There is some absolute limitation beyond which I cannot go, given all circumstances as they are. And the way we illustrate this, usually in economics, is with a graph. So I'll give you this graph. So we have here a mathematical, logical illustration and a graphical illustration. And you see up here an logical representation of the production process. It involves three factors of production, X, Y, and Z. So we have here a conjunction of the three factors, X and Y and Z. And it gives us a product, Q. Now, what the graph represents is the way the output, Q, changes as we vary the impact, as we vary the quantity of one of these factors of production, X. So we hold Y and Z constant, and we vary X. Now, an example. We are planting wheat. So we have several factors of production. We have human labor, could be our X. In most textbooks, that's usually it's the X, right? And then we have land, so it's the surface that we work, and then we have some fertilizer. Okay, and then of course there are others too, right? You need some sunshine after all, you need water and so on. I didn't include this here. And so let's say we have these three factors. Now you hold the surface constant. You always use the same quantity of fertilizer, and you increase the quantity of labor. Then we can increase the output as we go on, but only up to a certain limit, beyond which it is not possible to do this, beyond which we will actually have a diminished return on the use of this factor of production. And the reason this is so is that the other factors that we hold constant render limited services. A certain amount, whatever, 1 ton of fertilizer renders only so and so many services. Right? Can certain impact on growth processes, but I mean 1 ton only has this and that impact. 1 hectare of land only has this and that impact, helps only grow so and so much wheat, not more. So the reason why the impact of our human labor here is limited is because the other factors of production do not vary and render limited services. And it's the same way if we change the roles. If our x here would be, for example, fertilizer, and we hold the surface of the area that we work constant, and also the quantity of fertilizer. Excuse me, the quantity of work. So it's always the same man hours, always the same surface, 1 hectare. Now we're increasing the fertilizer. To some extent, it will help us increase our production. But as from some point, right, imagine just we're covering all of the surface with fertilizer, 10 inches high, this will not facilitate the growth process, okay, right? So then it actually diminishes. And so again, the reason why the fertilizer has a limited impact is because the other factors do not vary. It's the other factors that remain constant that limit the impact of the varying factor, and whatever the roles are. So this is the law of return. The law of returns, and again, the basic, the essential meaning of the law of returns is that there is some upper limit beyond which we cannot go, given by varying the impact of any one factor, given if the other factors of production do not vary. So the question then is, if this is so, have we ever been able to get out of poverty? Our ancestors in remote times have been living in abject poverty, and by today's standards, the standards that we are used to under the impact of the Industrial Revolution, which is still ongoing, are incomparably higher than the living standards of our ancestors even living in the 18th century. So why have we been able to get beyond this? Because this is obviously what has happened. And we've been able to get beyond this barrier. And the way to do this, there are, well, basically 2 ways to do this. In any case, 2 ways to do this that I will discuss with you this afternoon. These are savings investments on the one hand, and the division of labor on the other hand. So you see that here the division of labor is part of this overall picture. As the title of my lecture, but it's part of an overall picture. So we need to grasp the overall picture. The division of labor helps us to get beyond this barrier. Savings investment help us also to go beyond this barrier. So what happens here, I will illustrate this later, is this. So what we'll do now is to turn first to savings investment, which creates something that that Austrian economists call roundabout production. And then we will turn to the division of labor. So roundabout production allows us to go beyond this by shifting this curve upwards. So there's still a limitation, but it's now at a higher level. So the law of return still holds, but it holds at a higher level. How is this possible? Well, we do this by increasing the quantities of the other factors of production. That is, we have here now a Y2 and a Z2 that are still constant, but at a higher level. We're cultivating a greater surface of land. We're using more fertilizer. So with the same amount of labor, we can now produce more wheat. And we're shifting simply our curve upward. Most notably, what we are doing, well, so this would be the one possibility how this could happen. Another possibility is to substitute natural forces for human labor. We are creating tools that do human labor instead of human beings themselves. For example, we are creating a machine that packages bottles or that pumps air into tires and so on. So in any case, in all these whatever concretely we are doing, in any case, we are always changing the Y's and the Z's. We are always changing the other factors of production with which we combine human labor. In the most primitive setting, we are working only with such factors of production as we find in nature spontaneously, that is without human intervention. We're working with the land that exists there, and with the air that exists spontaneously in nature, etc., etc. Then, of course, we can go on and produce more land. For example, we can produce more land by building skyscrapers, and we get more surface because we're going up high. Or we get going down if we are constructing several levels of floor down into the ground. For example, the NSA does this. Well, we are doing it too when we're constructing our cave or something, right? So we create more standing surface, we create more land. We're creating oxygen for the operation of submarines and for other things. And so in such cases, we produce more of the factor of production that we need in excess of the quantities that are available spontaneously in nature. It's always the same principle. But what this means is that we need time to do this. Human action is stretched out in time. So we can no longer dedicate all of our time, or as much of our time, to consumption or to the production of consumer goods as we have done before. Now we need to take out part of our time budget and dedicate it to the production of producer goods, to the production of factors of production. Take, for example, the classic example of the fisherman. Example that is, I believe it's used by Böhm-Bawerk, and he has taken it over from Karl Knies, was a German economist in the 19th century, so staying within the German tradition. The fisherman. So the fisherman, he lives happily on the next to a river or on the seashore, and he needs one fish per day to survive. Because he has a very good spot, he can fish 2 fishes per day with his bare hands, because he's in the most primitive setting, whatever. 2 fishes per day with his bare hands. It's not bad. I mean, if I tried to do this, it would take me a week, and I would have, whatever, not even 1 fish. So, I mean, he's a smart guy, and he catches 2 fish per day with his bare hands. So he needs 1 fish per day to survive, so he can, with the work of 1 day, survive 2 days. 1 day is dedicated to production, the production of our consumer goods. The second day can be dedicated to leisure. Right? You can sit there, lay down, look at the skies, watch the clouds, listen to the birds, sing a love song, or war eagle song, or something else. In other words, he's consuming a consumer's good. Leisure is a consumer good. Right? So he's consuming. 1 day of work, during which he consumes, and then the second day entirely dedicated to consumption. Now, how can he increase his productivity of labor? Well, by constructing a tool, for example, a net. He could take some lianes or something that he finds in the woods, some katsu, right? And build a net. And here in Alabama, you would take katsu, it's a Japanese import. You build a net, but in order to construct the net, you need time. So, in order to survive the time needed for the construction of the net, he needs to consume. There is no production without consumption. But of course, this production process, constructing the net, does not yield directly another consumer good. So he needs to produce fish in advance, and use them then during those days in which he dedicates himself only to constructing the net. So, for example, he would work 4 days now in a row, no more leisure day, right? No more time taking off just looking at the skies and so on. He works 4 days in a row, eats 1 fish per day, and at the end of the 4 days, he has accumulated a stock of 4 fish. So he can survive with a stock of 4 fish 4 more days. Now, my students in Angers are very smart. They always ask me, well, but the fish will rot, so it won't help. But then comes the smart German professor. Yeah, but he will have a little hole in the ground somewhere, which he fills up with water, so the fish cannot swim away. So he will survive the 4 days. Not the fish, but he. Yeah. And during the 4 days, and after 4 days, he will then have a net. And with the help of this net, then he can fish a much greater quantity of fish per day. He can catch whatever, 17 fish per day or 170. Doesn't matter. So an enormous quantity of fish. So what do we learn from this example? Well, the first thing I've already stressed, production needs consumption. There is no such thing as production without consumption. And because this is so, because we need to produce, we need to consume in order to be able to engage in production, we need to have some savings. And some of our revenue of the past period must have been set aside to allow us to continue working in the present. And this is always so. It doesn't strike us this way because, we are raised usually in families, so in this case our parents provide the savings that allow us to go to school, right? Even while we don't create all the consumer goods that are needed to keep us alive. And then later on, we take over, right, building on the savings that we have built, that our parents have created in the first place and that we have set out then ourselves, and we go on producing. So production always needs savings beforehand. The second one, production needs time. That's the reason why we need production process, why we need savings in the first place. And in order to engage in the production of producer goods, we need to cut the consumption of consumer goods. And we had to renounce, in the case of the fisherman, he had to renounce to 4 days of leisure and 4 days of singing songs, during which he now engaged in the construction of the net. So we can infer from this that there's a general rule. It's in fact a law of production. The higher are our savings, the more lengthier are the production processes in which we can engage. And therefore, the more productive can human labor become. So of course, no necessity here, right? It depends on the fact that during the longer production process, we use our time to construct those tools that will really enable us to produce more than before. We might be wrong about this. And here I took the idea of a net. Net is fairly well known, and maybe our fisherman, he has, in his spare time, right, he has, on his leisure days, he has observed a spider, how the spider caught the flies, and so on, say, well, I could do the same thing with the fish. Right? So he thought it was pretty sure that this technology would work out. But sometimes we try technologies that do not work. And so we have saved, we have then started out to invest, and actually it was a wrong investment, right? Happens all the time. But in any case, right, this doesn't change anything to the general law that we have formulated. The longer the production process, or the higher our savings, the longer can be the production processes, and the more productive, therefore, can become human labor. And this is the law of roundabout production. What are the limits to this process? And we could raise the question, well, why don't we do this indefinitely? If we can simply increase our wealth simply by saving about more, why don't we do this? Well, the first reason is that, of course, we need to consume a minimum. We cannot cut down our consumption to zero. It's impossible. Right? Human beings operate under the constraint of the stomach. Right? Otherwise, we are no angels. Right? Angels are completely spiritual beings, and they wouldn't need to consume. But on the other hand, there's no need for them to produce either. Right? If you don't need to consume, you don't need to produce. So it's a truly human problem to which we are confronted. So we need to consume a minimum, and therefore our savings are limited. There's an absolute limit to our possible savings. The second limit is time preference. Right? Even though we know that we could increase our productivity, in the future, by cutting on our consumption right now, we might not always want to do this. We might actually prefer have a higher consumption now than a higher consumption in the future. There's nothing wrong with this. Economic science doesn't tell us what is the optimal savings rate or something. Right? You should save more or you should save less. But it's just a fact. And people have different opinions about this and different value judgments, have different subjective values. And values are subjective, depend on the individual. So some individuals will live happily with at a relatively low material level throughout their lives because they enjoy consumption in the present, and others are always looking to increase consumption in the future and are therefore ready to cut down consumption in the present. So we have the principle of the division of roundabout production, and it entails such an increase of the limits on our returns. So this is the first step. The first way to increase the productivity of human labor. The second way to do this is through the division of labor, which brings us to our subject, as announced in the title at least. What is the division of labor? Well, it's the specialization in the production of specific products. It's human cooperation in which human cooperation between specialists. We can imagine that Robinson Crusoe on his island is producing all the consumer goods that he needs. So he's chasing rabbits and he's picking apples. He's feeding on this healthy diet, meat and apples, meat and fruit. And then arrives Friday. Friday arrives on the island, and now Friday also eats apples and rabbits because actually there's nothing else on this island that could be eaten. So happily they both like apples and rabbits, and so they now can cooperate in producing these two goods. They can specialize. One of them can specialize maybe in the production of apples, and the other one can specialize in the production of rabbits. Now this depends on their relative productivities. We can here distinguish three cases. I would like to discuss with you briefly these three cases. Okay, let's see. So the first case is the following one. Can you see this? Or should I zoom? No. Yep. Okay, that's okay. So you see here in the first two columns are the productivities of Peter and Paul, the two individuals. So it's not Crusoe and Friday. I like Peter and Paul for reasons that some might know. So with their productivity in apple production and rabbit production, Peter can plug 10 kilograms, sorry for that, of apples per hour. Could have 10 pounds or something, but yeah, for me it's easier to represent this. And he can chase, not only chase, but actually kill 2 rabbits per hour. And Paul can pick 15 kilograms of apples per hour, and he chases and kills 1 rabbit per hour. So he produces 1 dead rabbit per hour, but it's fresh flesh. Yeah. So clearly now Paul is the better apple picker, and Peter is the better hunter. So there is a division of labor possible between them, because they can be entirely, they can specialize entirely in that area in which they are relatively better than their partner. So before the division of labor, right, that's the third column, before the division of labor, each one of them was dedicating 5 hours to the production of apples and 5 hours to the hunt. So Peter produced 50 kilograms of apples and hunted 10 rabbits, and Paul produced 75 kilograms of apples and 5 rabbits. And after the specialization, which Peter specializes on hunting and Paul on apple picking, they have different quantities. 20 rabbits are now being killed and 150 kilograms of apples are being picked. So this means that from an aggregate point of view, we have increased the overall product, right, the gross domestic product of our society. So this is our next line, right? So you see this, the sum. Before the division of labor, we had 125 kilograms total apple production and 15 total rabbit production, and thereafter 150 kilograms and 20. So the aggregate product, the gross domestic product of our two-people society has increased. The division of labor is therefore an independent cause of wealth creation. This is what results from this analysis. Very simple. We can summarize this by saying that the division of labor is an independent cause of wealth creation. It has nothing to do with the qualities of the individuals per se or of any technology. It's just by cooperating that they create a higher physical output. Now, one might raise the question, what happens if one of the guys is superior to the other in all respects? Is a division of labor possible even then? So you have the Superman on the one hand and the zero on the other hand. China here, France there, as I always say to my French students, right? So they are always, I mean, if you just read the mainstream media or the business news, sometimes you get crazy, right? Because you think that, they always, especially in France, have the obsession with representing foreign nations as overwhelmingly powerful, and we need to entrust our lives to our government, which alone will save us from these invading powers. So I always bring this up. Okay, so we have China and France, or Superman, and the complete zero. And is a division of labor possible between them? The crucial question is, how could the Superman possibly benefit from the cooperation of the zero guy? Does he need them at all? And indeed, for many centuries, social analysts have claimed that he wouldn't need them at all. And therefore, if he cooperates with inferior people at all, he's actually rendering them a service, right, a gratuity. And the least thing he could expect in return is therefore obedience. Okay? I am friendly enough to help you out, to share my overwhelming productive powers with you, therefore at least you should obey when I tell you to do this or that and go to war in particular. So, we have the case 2 in which we have these different productivities. And what economists have shown, and the classical economists in particular, most notably David Ricardo, is that even in such a case, we can create a mutually beneficial division of labor. Let's consider the case 2. So Paul is now the Superman. He's not a smashing Superman, but he's clearly superior, right? For example, Paul could be the father of Peter. Right? Peter is maybe 10 years old and Paul is 30 or something. So Paul produces more apples and he hunts more rabbits, kills more rabbits than Peter. Can they cooperate? And indeed they can. What is necessary in this case is that Peter specializes completely on that area where he is relatively best. Of course, he's not better than Paul, but where he is not quite as bad as compared to Paul than in the other area. Now, which is this area? Well, it's clearly apple production, because in apple production he is 50% less efficient than Paul, whereas in rabbit production he is twice as inefficient, 100% as inefficient as Paul. So he will specialize completely in apple production, and Paul will now keep splitting his time, but dedicate a relatively greater time budget on the production of the other good, that is on the hunt, and reduce somewhat his apple production. So Paul, in my example here, he will expand his rabbit production from 5 hours to 8 hours. So rather than hunting 20 rabbits, he now hunts 32 rabbits, and he reduces his apple production from 5 hours to 2 hours. So rather than 75 kilograms, he produces 30 kilograms. The result is, again, an increase of the aggregate product. Up. An increase of aggregate product. Now the implication is that the Superman always stands to benefit from the division of labor. He benefits as much as the other guy. So it's not out of friendship or charity or something else that superior people, and superior people always exist, cooperate with inferior people, inferior in certain regards. It is out of their self-interest. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is then the key to the economic explanation of the origin of society. People cooperate because they stand to benefit from cooperation. Even if if the cooperation occurs between superiors and inferiors. It's not out of charity, that is, at least not only out of charity, it's also out of self-interest. Even if the two partners did have no feelings of sympathy to one another, no feelings of love, if they hated one another, they still would have a material incentive to cooperate. It's a very powerful realization. So people have a material incentive to keep the peace and to look for possibilities to cooperate with other people, independent of what their emotional feelings toward these other people are. This is a wonderful feature of the world in which we live, and because it's a force that is natural, cannot be suppressed, is universal, and pushes people to peace and cooperation. What are the conditions under which this result obtains? There is one essential condition, namely inequality of the partners. And we can see this condition if we analyze a case in which they are perfectly equal. So we have here case 3. In this case, Peter and Paul are clones. Twins or whatever, even more than, because twins, they get different in the course of time, right? So if one gets specialist in music and the other one in whatever, wheat planting. But here they're completely equal. There's really clones and they remain so. Same productivity in apple production, same productivity on the hunt. Now, and I've taken you one example how you can divide the specialization between them, but you can take any other combination, just make it out for yourself. It's easy to see that they cannot possibly increase the overall physical product of their activities. Impossible. It always stays the same. It's always the damn same 100 kilograms of apples, and always the same 20 rabbits. Year in, year out, or day in, day out. Okay, it doesn't increase. Now this again is very important. It runs counter, of course, to our popular egalitarian preconceptions, political preconceptions of our time, namely that somehow greater equality is good. What this analysis shows is that greater equality tends to destroy society because it tends to destroy the material incentives for cooperation. To the extent that you make people exactly equal, that they're only clones, you really need a great amount of love, charity, and so on in order to remain peaceful and not hit the other guy on the head and rob him, because this then is the only way to enrich yourself above what you had before. So the division of labor creates wealth to the extent that it takes place between unequal partners. This is a necessary condition. It's not a sufficient condition because they might still choose a wrong specialization. For example, in our case, 2, right? If Paul, who is the Superman in case 2, if he completely specialized, let's say in hunting, they would not necessarily get a greater overall product, right? They would get a greater overall product as far as rabbits is concerned, but the apple production would diminish. So it's not clear in that case that the overall product would increase. But in any case, so it's a necessary condition. People need to be unequal. And what the division of labor does then is to allow people, to enable them to exploit their differences. Right? They benefit from the fact that they are unequal. Okay, so now we have these 2 basic mechanisms, roundabout production and the division of labor. And roundabout production, as we have seen, is based on savings. But savings, the importance of savings goes far beyond roundabout production. It also covers the division of labor. And this is something that I will discuss now. This is my last and 6th point, the fundamental role of savings. So savings increase the productivity of human labor in 3 different ways. 3 different but related ways. The first one is, as we have seen, roundaboutness. The more we save, the longer can be the production process, therefore the higher can be, the more tools we can create and so on that substitute for human labor, therefore the more productive we become. But roundabout production, for the same reason, also tends to increase the division of labor. Think again of our example of the fisherman. The fisherman moves, if he chooses to construct his net, from a very primitive way of fishing, maybe fishing with his bare hands, to a more developed way, roundabout way, in which he first produces a net and then with the net fishes the fish. Then, of course, he can extend this roundaboutness. For example, he can save even more, and then he can produce a needle, which will facilitate his production of the net. Right? In order to construct the needle, he can, in the next step, then construct a hammer or something else that will facilitate the construction of needles. Right? So he can go on and on and on. Now, if he is all alone, then he would have to dedicate his time to the different stages of this production process. He would have to spend a few days on hammer production, a few days on needle production, a few days on net production, and a few days on fishing. But of course, within society, the same basic production process is liable to be subject to the division of labor. Some people can specialize entirely in fishing, some people can specialize entirely on net making, other people can specialize in needle making, and even more other people can specialize in hammer making, and so on. Now, but clearly, this division of labor is possible only because we have these savings. If there weren't these savings, if we only had enough savings to engage in very primitive production, then everybody would have to become a specialist in fishing. So no exploitation of the differences. Some guys are better at fishing, other guys are worse at fishing, that's it, end of story. It's only because we have a greater amount of savings and we can lengthen our production process that more possibilities become available for people to become specialists. So without savings, we cannot fully exploit the differences between individuals. It would be impossible to become a computer specialist, for example. Right? It would be terrible news for our current geeks. The third way through which savings increase the productivity of human labor is by their positive impact on technology. It's a factor about which we have not yet talked so far. So technology is the ensemble of ideas concerning the relationship between the ends that we want to attain and the means that we can use. Well, that's technology. There are different ways of producing a car, and different technologies. There are different ways to produce a cake, to bake a cake, different technologies. Now, savings benefit technological progress in two ways. First of all, without savings, the only technological progress that we would have is the one that comes to us spontaneously, or so to say, by divine inspiration. Right? We would be constantly be absorbed by some production process, either by fishing or by tool making and so on, and then we would have to count on or hope that in some minute or some second would be a sudden glimpse of light, and we see another idea that we could apply in our production process. What savings allow us to do is to consecrate time entirely to the production of ideas. When I gave you the example of the fisherman, I said that our Robinson, or whoever he is, he had the idea of net making during one of his leisure days when he looked at a spider net. If he is constantly absorbed by fishing, or he wouldn't have time to look at spider nets. So it's only thanks to savings, thanks to the leisure that we can, of course, spend only with beer drinking or binge drinking and so on is one possibility, but which we can also use to contemplate our environment, to learn more about the environment, that we develop new ideas. Right? And so all R&D departments in companies are financed out of savings. And that part of the revenue, of the past revenue of the company that is not used now for consumptive purposes or for the purchase of other factors of production. Universities are paid out of savings. There's some technological progress that comes out of universities, not too much. But it's, in any case, it's that what comes out of them is due to savings exclusively. The second way in which savings benefit technological progress is by giving us the time to realize these new ideas, because ideas do not spring into practice fully fledged. It's not because we have the idea of a net that it jumps into existence. We need to make the net. And so we need, again, savings to apply technological knowledge. So savings are absolutely fundamental. Austrian economists, therefore, endorse fully the program of the classical economists, and of Adam Smith in particular, who have seen in savings the mainspring of parsimony, as Adam Smith said, frugality, the mainspring of material progress. So these are the real mechanisms of economic growth. Right? The basic problem is always the limitation of productivity, limitation that we call by the name of the law of returns. There's always a maximum limit to the impact of any other factor, of any one factor, if the other factors do not vary in quantity. And we can increase this limitation essentially through roundabout production and through the division of labor. And in this whole process, the savings play a central role. What needs to be seen now, what I've not presented in my lecture, is how the same basic process, increasing the length of production, increasing the division of labor, is organized within a monetary economy. And what we Austrian economists stress here is that this whole process is basically the same, but it is directed through the prices, the pricing mechanism. So it's market prices that direct entrepreneurial activity into those areas which become possible thanks to increased savings, into those new specializations that become possible through to increased savings and to changes of the preferences of consumers. That was it as far as my lecture is concerned. I think we have a few minutes for questions. Any questions?
You say that innovation can come about from having more time to think about things.
Yes.
Could it also come about from just doing our job a lot and
Yeah.
realizing?
Yes. Yeah. Right. So this is something I would say that occurs is a spontaneous innovation, right? Spontaneous technological progress. But even then, right, you cannot be completely absorbed by the manual gestures and so on. So you need to have some time to stand back, and even if it's just an hour before you fall asleep, tired in your bed and so on, right? You need to have some time to think about this. Mm.
Would you mind repeating the last concept you stated?
Which one?
I
I talked about technological progress, the fundamental role of savings.
Basically the summary.
The summary.
One new idea that isn't much faster.
Well, I said something that I said also in the introduction, where I said that in my lecture I cover only the real mechanisms, so those that do not depend on any monetary factors.
Oh, right.
Okay.
I remember now. As it has to do with price.
With?
Prices and entrepreneurial activity.
Prices and entrepreneurial activity.
If you could just repeat that.
Well,
My bad.
the division of labor can be organized in different ways. Right? For example, fundamentally we can distinguish between violent and voluntary ways of organizing the division of labor. Now we'll leave aside all the violent ways, right? You have the one guy with the big stick and he's setting the others on there, said you are doing this, and so on. The violent guys can be a collective and so on. We leave this aside. But even if we think of purely voluntary ways, right, we can imagine in particular that all decisions are being taken by the collective of all producers simultaneously. So they gather into a council and make production decisions together. Second possibility is we have decision making by delegation. We have some guys who are making the decisions for everybody else. In extremis, only one guy or one girl who makes the decision for everybody else. Right? It seems to be ludicrous that this could take place voluntarily, but I mean, it's actually true, right? Because the closest case that I've ever encountered in practice are the Moonies. Does anybody know what the Moonies are? It's a sect, right? It's a sect. And so they have a very funny theology. It's that Christ didn't finish the job. And in particular, what he didn't do was to get married. Okay? And so what the Reverend Moon, this is the leader of the sect, does is, first of all, he got married, and now he's getting everybody else to get married. And in particular, he's marrying everybody completely randomly. Because the important thing is to get married and not to be stuck with racial presuppositions and so on. Reverend Moon, he is from South Korea, and he has a South Korean wife, but he insists very much that Frenchmen marry Eskimos and Russians, people from South Africa, and Americans, people, Aborigines, and so on. So everything has to be mixed, and they meet once a year in a big football stadium, 80,000 people and something, and then they call up the new couples and discover themselves. Yeah. So this is about as far as I've ever seen the one guru guy directing the lives of everybody else in a completely voluntary setting, because he doesn't have a stick. I didn't see the stick, right? Yeah. So, I mean, clearly this is limited. Right? This is the charismatic sect leader. Right? This is a limited impact. The collectivist decision-making, the producer cooperative, is also limited. Most of you will get married one day. Most of you have observed your parents making collective decisions with two persons, okay? And so you know that this is far from being obvious, okay? Getting to a common opinion, right? I mean, if it's already, I mean, look at the divorce rates. Right? It seems to be impossible to get common ground with two people for any extended period of time. Now, how can we imagine that this should be possible with a producer cooperative involving not only whatever 2, but 5 or 10, but 5,000 or 5 million or 5 billion people? This is completely out of the question. Right? It's out of the question. So the only thing that remains then is cooperation through the market, or coordination through the market process. And people cooperate meaningfully with one another, that they are complementary, their activities are complementary to one another, being steered by market prices. I work for this guy because he pays me a high salary and offers nice working conditions. I get the best package from him, get the highest price. Therefore, I work from him. Why is he able to offer me the best price? Well, because consumers pay the highest price for his products. Why do consumers pay the highest prices for his products? Well, because his products are better in their eyes than all the other things on which they could also spend their money. Right? So there is a coordination, right? Complementarity, a human cooperation arranged, steered by spontaneously. It's not one single individual who makes decisions for everybody, or one gremium, one council that makes decisions for everybody else. But people are led to cooperate by the incentives coming through the pricing process. Right? So this is a very short summary of what this is all about, and you should, well, so listen carefully to the following lectures in which this will be explained in more detail.
Flippant question and a more serious question. Flippant question is, do you think the problem in master relationships is a system of barter where the commission, there's no equivalent of money?
Yeah.
More serious question. The more serious question is, I know you didn't want to treat the monetary aspects of saving in this lecture. It seems to me, what is saved, what is being saved of the goods. Now, when you add money into the picture, someone who saves money, in what sense are they saving goods? Doesn't it depend upon an ongoing process of production and consumption by other people to allow monetary savings?
Right. So this is, I answered the latter question first. So indeed, this is one of the modification that comes into this process through the presence of money. Right? It's not the case that we are simply in a market economy that we are stockpiling the goods like Crusoe, right? He's stockpiling fishes or apples and then he's living off this, or he's digging his little hole in the ground and eating one fish out of like Smeagol, right? After the other. But rather, what is happening is that you have an ongoing production process in which the relative weights between producer good production and consumer good production change constantly, but need to be coordinated because they are interdependent. So it gets more complicated, but the basic process still remains the same. And then, of course, okay, the flippant first question. Yeah, I mean, it's a very nice suggestion. I will propose this to my wife, so it's about €1 a kiss or something. Well, debt is not something different, but savings. Debt is a particular way of transferring monetary resources from one end of the economy to another. And, if you have an economy in which no money creation takes place, that operates with a constant money supply, right, then debt means that some people give a credit to other people. So the money that they could have used is transferred to other people that now can use it. So there's no net increase of savings. As simple as debt or credit is a particular way of using savings or of channeling savings from one individual to another. So it's part of the division of financial labor, if you wish. Okay, so it's not something separate. And then, of course, the other question is, can we, the real question is, can we substitute money production for savings? Do we have to renounce to something in order to save more, in order to spend more on production processes, on investment projects? Or can we not simply create all the money that we need? And we print all the money, so I mean, we consume just as much as before or even more. Now we print more money and can invest, therefore, on top of this. And this is not possible, right? It's one of the points of the Austrian theory of the business cycle to show this, right? And the ultimate reason is that it must be savings in real terms, right? So you need to have a reduction of consumer expenditure, of consumption, of consumer goods, actually.
Even if that transfer of wealth from one sector to another via debt goes to like a very confident entrepreneur and actually uses that debt to invest in something that turns out to be highly
of course, this is one of the reasons why debt exists in the first place, right? Because people.
It would have been saved first.
Exactly. You can only give this as a credit, what has been saved first by yourself. You can only go into debt to the extent that another guy renounces to his revenue, income. Thank you for your attention.